Good day, class. Welcome to Computer Fundamentals and Programming. For this week, we will discuss about designing using CSS. Last time, we discussed about what HTML is and what are the tags and elements that are involved in creating HTML. So this week, we will try to design or give some designs to those HTML file. So it's like putting some colors, formatting of text or font to our blueprint. Okay. Here's what you'll find in this lecture. The first one is Introduction to CSS, explain what cascading style sheet is, different properties in CSS to be familiarized with the different CSS or CSS properties, and then applying designs to HTML using CSS. So we'll import CSS styles to HTML and create CSS file to modify properties of HTML. So we're going to create a different file or that CSS file format, and we will try to import it to HTML. So HTML and CSS will work together in order for you to give a better display of your website. Introduction to CSS. So cascading style sheet or CSS stands for the cascading style sheet, and CSS describes how HTML elements are to be displayed. So we all know that in HTML we can create headings, we can create paragraphs, we can create divisions of these elements. So we will try to create some designs using CSS and put some colors or let's say accent to those elements. So here's how you start making your design. So let us try to copy paste this code here. So I'm gonna post this video and then skip it, and then I'm gonna show you how it will work on our text editor. Okay, so here's the file. Let me minimize it. So I just copy paste the code and then put it in our text editor. Okay, so here's the presentation and also the code that I typed, or let's say copy paste in our text editor. So it's just the same. And then here we have a style tag. So this is where we put our designs or put some designs to those elements inside the HTML. So we all know in HTML that inside the body element, those are the contents that we can see in our browser. So what are those elements that we can see inside our browser? So that's the body, and then the H1, and then the P. So meaning to say we're trying to change the format or color or font size or font family of those elements, so that once we type some words or contents to it, we will be able to see the difference between unformatted elements or not. Okay, so let's try to run this. So I named this file as sample.html. So let me maximize it so to have a better look of the codes. So here's the code. So I'm gonna try to run it on our browser and see if there's an error or let's say some problems with my CSS file, okay, or HTML file. Okay, so let me change some of this spacing. Okay, so let's just minimize this. Let's just open the browser. So we'll open the file. So it's located in our desktop, so therefore, okay, so this is the sample.html. As you can see, the icon is also Microsoft Edge. Since the HTML runs on browser, so it would just copy the icon of the browser that is available on your computer. So once you hit open, this is your HTML with CSS design. Okay, so as you can see, the background becomes light blue, and then what else? So H1, the message is, or the text is my first CSS heading. So the color is blue, or the color of the font is blue. So that's why it's blue. And then what else? The font size is 40. So let's say we try to change it into 20. So save it and then refresh the page, it would become 20. How about the font family? Let's say in our paragraph we have the font family Verdana, font size 20. So this is Verdana. How about in H1? So it doesn't mean that we could only use font family in paragraph. We could also use font family on the different HTML elements. So let's say we add here the font family. Let's say Times New Roman. And then separated by a semicolon. Okay, wait, let me try to fix this. Let's try this. Wait, by default it's Times New Roman. Forgot. How about Arial? So it becomes Arial. Let's say Calibri. Okay, so it becomes Calibri. Okay, so those are the different properties or common properties that we use. The background color, also the font family, color, then font size. Okay, so what else? So here we have the syntax or CSS syntax for our elements. So here we have the selector. So it means that it would select the element that you want to modify. And then inside this selector or elements are this set of the properties that you want to change. So meaning to say this curly bracket here signifies that there's a set of properties that you want to change. Okay, so here's the first declaration, color, and the color is the property. The value of the color is value. So it's like a ratio. Color is blue. Okay, so there's a ratio here. Color is blue. Or this is just a separator for the property and the value. And then this one is the separator for each declaration. So another declaration is font size. So meaning to say it doesn't have anything to do with the color. So we're trying to change the font size to 40px. Okay, so the property is font size, the value is 40px. So there are different, or there are other properties that you could get in order to change the properties of the CSS styles or the different HTML elements. Okay, so in H1 it's just like H1 we try to change the color into blue and then the font size into 40px. So at the end we have the ending curly brace. So meaning to say it's the end of our declaration of different properties. Okay, so how to import a CSS file? So the first one, we have to create a file style.css. Second one is put all the styles inside the style.css and then use the link tag inside the head element like this. Okay, so let's try this. Here's our text editor. Let's have a new file and save it as style.css. So remember class that the location of the HTML file and CSS file for beginners, we have to put it inside the same folder. So for example, you save your file in desktop folder, then you have to save the CSS file to our desktop folder also. Okay, so here I'm inside the desktop folder, so I'm going to change it to all files, and then says there that we have to change the name to style.css. So it's arbitrary, depends on you what would be the name of the CSS file, but for most cases we use the general term in computer engineering or computer science subjects that the style or the CSS style is we use the style name to refer to the CSS. Okay, so style.css, we will save it inside the desktop folder. So once you hit enter, we have the CSS style. And then the next one says here that put all the styles inside the style.css. So meaning to say all the elements or all the selectors and their corresponding properties inside the style tag would be transferred to our style.css. So just like this one, I'll just highlight this code here, Control X, and then paste in here. Okay, and then after that class, you have to remove this style tag here since we're not editing in HTML file. So style.css doesn't use tags. So we have to remove a style tag or style opening tag and closing tag, just like this. And then another one class in defining the CSS properties, the selector would remain on top, and then inside the selector we have to put or separate each properties inside the open and close curly brace, just like this one. Okay, so as you can see, there's a better view, or you can view it more understandable. It's more readable. In our body element, we have the background color light blue, and then the text aligns center. So we'll try to follow that until we get to the end of the line. Okay. Oops, there's a semicolon here. Always remember to put the semicolon at the end of each property. Okay, so we're all set. So here's your CSS styles. So for body, the background color is light blue, the text align is center. So H1, we have the font family Calibri. Color of the font is blue, font size 20. And then for the P, or the paragraph element, we have the font family Verdana, and then font size 20px. Okay, and then inside the head, use the link tag inside the head element like this. So we'll just have to follow this format. So we have the link, then says here rel equals to style sheet. Okay, forgot to put it inside the double quotes, and then the href equal to style dot css. So meaning to say we're going to load the style.css inside our HTML file. Okay, so remember that both of these files are inside the desktop folder. Okay, so it should remain the same as we run this CSS file. Okay, so nothing changes because it's still the same. We didn't change anything in the properties. Okay, so now you have the HTML file and then the CSS style. Okay, so what is the purpose of doing this? Changing the location of the style, even though we know that we could just put all of these codes inside our HTML file. Why do we have to separate the style? Okay, one reason is that if an error occurs in the HTML file, you would only look for the HTML file, not in the CSS style. Okay, some of the programs or websites have large amount of codes, or they have a very long code that would reach until maybe 15,000 to 20,000 codes of different HTML file. So it's a better, or it's a good thing that you separate the CSS style so that it would minimize the number of lines used in the HTML code. And then the next one is also the error tracking, or let's say if you want to detect some errors in the HTML file, that would be easy for you to do because it's only a few lines compared to HTML plus CSS codes inside a single file. Okay, so if the error occurs in the CSS file, then therefore we're able to detect it faster, even though uh, most of the time it doesn't appear on your browser. But as you code or as you practice coding, you will be able to get the rhythm, let's say the rhythm of designing in CSS. Okay, so let's try to move on to our next slide. So let us try this. We have the oh, I see. I think we have already done this a while ago. We have already import the CSS file, or we have already separated the styles from HTML to the CSS file. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. So we have the ID selector, CSS ID selector. So the ID selector uses the ID attribute of an HTML element to select a specific element. Okay, so an ID in HTML, we have the ID attribute. So you can name it anything you want. So for example, me. So the ID of this h1 is me. So in order for you to select this distinct element, so we have to use the ID selector. A while ago, we only had the body h1 and p, but this time we have the ID selector, which denotes the me. Okay, so here we have the hashtag or sharp me, and then inside is the property color equal to white. So I mean to say all h1 would be color red, and then the element which has an ID me would be color white. Okay, so this h1 here, the color is white, and then the rest of the h1 will become color red. Okay, so let us try this code here. So the background color is orange. Let us try that. Orange. Wait, let me change that. And then font family is Verdana. Font family is Verdana, and then the h1 is color red. Let me try to change this. So the color is red, and then we have the hashtag me. So inside this ID selector, we have the color white. So meaning to say all h1s will become red except for the h1 that has the ID selector me, or the ID attribute me. Okay, then the p. So I think we will not be able to see the effect of this p here since there's no paragraph element in our HTML. So let's have this, or let's change this one. Then let's remove this p here. And then in order for us to give an ID to an element, so we have the ID, very descriptive name, equal to me. Okay, so that's it. This h1 here has an ID me. And then inside the CSS style, in order to select that ID, we have to put the hashtag and then the name of the ID, which is me. Okay, so inside the implementation of me, the color of the font is white. Now let us try it. Okay, so there are 3 h1s. One of them has an ID me. Okay, so the rest of the h1s are red, and then the middle part is white. So for example, we have lots of h1s. So once we hit F5, so this heading here remains white, and then the rest is red. Okay, so that's for our ID selector. So the next one is the class selector. So the, oops, I forgot to change the ID selector meaning here. So the class selector actually selects a group of HTML elements and then try to change its formatting. So it's like the ID attribute, but this time it involves different elements. Okay, say for example we have here 3 classes, so we'll just have to modify this. So this one has ID, which is equals to me, and then this one to declare a class, so it's equal to, say, C1. And then let us create a paragraph here. Okay, let's say another CSS sample. So let me duplicate this, and then inside the P tag we have another class equals to C1. Okay, so we have a group of elements with a class C1, and these elements are different. This element here is H1, the other one is a paragraph. Okay, so let's try it. Wait, we have to define what are the properties of C1. So we have to go to our CSS file and then create another property. So in order for us to have a class selector, we have to include a dot and then the name of the class, which is C1. Okay, for ID it's hashtag. For class we have a dot. Okay, so inside the C1 we have to change it to font. Let's say font family is equal to let's say Arial. Then font size is 40 px. Okay. Let's try this. So as we refresh the page, we have this CSS. Okay, another CSS sample. So this is a paragraph, this is a paragraph, and then this one is a paragraph with a higher size of font or font size. And then this one is a heading, but since we define the font size of this heading, meaning to say it's a bigger heading compared to other H1s. Okay, so that's all for now. Thank you for listening. But before you leave, or before that, I'm gonna show you a sample login page wherein it has an HTML file and a CSS file. Okay, so here we have let me open first the files. So it's module 12. So we have the index.html and the sample bg. So this is a sample background that would be used in our index.html. So here I included the style. So I haven't separated the style to our HTML. So it's pure HTML, and then we define the style inside the HTML. Okay, so as you can see, there's a lot of new things here, or a lot of changes in our properties. But I know for sure that some of them you're able to recognize. Some of them, I know. So there's the body. So what's this login box? So as you can see here, there's a sharp or hashtag here. So meaning to say this login box here is an ID selector. Okay, same goes for this one. Okay, so there are a lot of new properties. So I want you to check on that, I'm going to post this to our classroom. So I know that you are um, curious what would be the output of this HTML file. So let me run it on this machine. It's just a simple login form, and we will use that login form in our JavaScript. Okay, so I want you to have a copy of that so that you'll be able to catch up with our JavaScript. Okay, so this is the login form. The background is actually an HD picture, so that's why it takes time to load to our page. So here we have the login form, wherein we could type some codes here, also the password. We could also click here, lost your password, don't have an account. But actually this button here doesn't have any functionalities yet. Same goes for lost your password and don't have an account. Okay, so there's no credentials checking if this is correct, the password is correct, or username is correct, if you lost your password or don't have an account. So that's a job for a JavaScript programming language. Okay, so this is just purely a design of HTML and CSS. Okay, so I'm going to give you this file so that you'll be able to review what are the contents of this file here. Okay, so that's all for now. Thank you and God bless.